Hi, boys and girls. I am going to start reading to you from the final Mrs. Piggle Wiggle, Book 4. Chapter 1, The Not Truthful Cure. Mrs. Haraway was out in her side yard setting out zinnias, type of flower. She was very happy. The zinnia plants were not only unusually large with short, thick stalks and bright green leaves, but zinnia plants were mighty scarce that year. Mrs. Haraway hummed to herself as she dug holes for the fine young plants. How lucky she had been to get the last flat Mr. Windsor had. How lovely the zinnias were going to look against the freshly painted white house. She filled the hole with water, put in a little fertilizer, set in a plant, pushed earth around it, and tampled it down firmly with her trowel. By 3:30 she had planted them all. Standing up and stretching to get the crick out of her back, she called to her neighbor, Mrs. Wintergreen, who was setting out asters in her yard across the hedge. "Oh, Caroline, do come and see my zinnias. They are the finest plants I have ever seen." "Oh, they are beauties," said Caroline Wintergreen, coming through the hedge gate. "I can see them from here. Where in the world did you get them?" "From Mr. Windsor," said Mrs. Haraway. "They were the last ones he had." "Oh, darn," said Mrs. Wintergreen. "Never mind," said Mrs. Haraway. "I'll bring you over armloads of zinnias every morning when they are in bloom." Just then the front gate crashed open and Fetlock Haraway, aged 9, came bellowing into the yard. "Mama," he bawled, "the kids won't play with me." "And why not?" asked Mrs. Haraway, taking a handkerchief out of her sweater pocket and swabbing away his tears. "I don't know," wailed Fetlock. "They just don't like me. I guess it's because I'm so delicate and wear glasses. Children don't like me." "Nonsense," said Mrs. Wintergreen. "Wembley Rustard wears glasses and he has braces. And both children all like him. All the children like him. In fact, he's the most popular boy in his Cub Scout troop. I'm his den mother, and I know." "That's true, Fetlock, darling," said Mrs. Haraway. "Everybody loves Wembley." "Well, I don't," Fetlock said. "I hate and despise and detest him. He calls me a liar." "Oh, no," said Mrs. Haraway in a shocked voice. "Are you sure?" "You bet I'm sure," Fetlock said. "He just finished right outside our gate." "That's dreadful," said Mrs. Haraway, "and I don't blame you for being angry, but perhaps he'll apologize." "Well, why did you call him a liar?" asked Mrs. Wintergreen. "I don't know," said Fetlock, hanging his head on digging a hole in the grass with his toe in his shoe so he won't look at her in the eyes. "Of course you know," said Mrs. Wintergreen. "Now tell me." "I won't," said Fetlock. "It's none of your business, and I won't tell you." "Why, Fetlock, darling," said Mrs. Haraway, "Mother doesn't want her boy to be rude. Apologize to Mrs. Wintergreen, son, and then run upstairs and lie down on my chaise lounge. You look awfully tired." Fetlock said nothing, but continued to dig in the grass until he had a hole big enough for a gopher. Mrs. Haraway said, "Speak up, sweetheart. Tell Mrs. Wintergreen how sorry you are, and hurry. You don't look so well." Fetlock still said nothing. The hole grew big enough for a badger. Looking down at Fetlock as if he were a beetle, Mrs. Wintergreen said, "Well, Helen, I must get home if I want to finish setting out those asters before dinner." Mrs. Haraway said, "Please excuse Fetlock, Caroline. He's just a bundle of nerves." Mrs. Wintergreen banged the hedge of the gate behind her. Probably not too happy about Fetlock. Taking Fetlock's grubby, rather sticky hands in hers, Mrs. Haraway led him up to her room and laid him out, all muddy play clothes and everything, on her white velvet chaise lounge, covered him with her white satin quilt, and said, "Now rest, Lemmy Pie." Closing his eyes behind his spectacles, Fetlock said, "Before I rest, Mumsy dear, may I have something to eat?" "Oh, sweetheart, of course," said his mother. "What would you like? Some broth?" Which is just like some soup, because she doesn't think he feels well. "No," said Fetlock. "I was thinking more like a chocolate milkshake, a big piece of chocolate cake, some strawberry soda, and 2 or 3 giant-sized Tutti Frutti nut chocolate bars." "All that?" asked Mrs. Haraway. "Yes," said Fetlock. I don't really want it, but I must try to keep up my strength. What a dear, brave little boy you are, said Mrs. Harroway, hurrying across the room. As soon as he could hear his mother's footsteps on the stairs, Fetlock jumped off the change lounge, ran over to the bedside table, opened the drawer, and took out a box of chocolates. He stuffed 4 in his mouth and 6 in his pocket, and he went to the window and he yelled out at Mrs. Wintergreen, who was on her knees by her perennial bed. Hiya, old busybody. Fortunately, his mouth was so full of chocolates it sounded like Mrs. Wintergreen didn't even turn around. When Harroway came staggering in a few minutes later, when Mrs. Harroway came staggering in a few minutes later with Fetlock's snack, he was lying on the chaise lounge again, his eyes closed. Mrs. Harroway thought he looked so beautiful, she almost cried. Making her voice as gentle as a dove coo, she said, "Did you call, Fetlock, dear?" "No," said Fetlock. "I was asleep." "I was sure I heard someone calling," said his mother, propping him up with lace pillows and arranging the tray on his bony little knees. "Perhaps I called out in my sleep," Fetlock said, grabbing a chocolate cake and taking a huge bite out of the frosting. "I'm very restless, you know." "You poor child," said Mrs. Harroway. "Would you like Mother to read to you?" Before Fetlock could answer, the telephone rang. Mrs. Harroway hurried out the hall to answer it on the upstairs extension. That was before cell phones, though, so friends, right? So the phones were attached to the house. She said, "Oh, yes, Mrs. Mallet. Yes, yes, yes. Are you sure? Are you positive? Fetlock? I'll speak to him. I'm terribly sorry. I can't understand it. Are you positive? Yes, I'll speak to him right away." But when she went to speak to Fetlock, he was gone, as was the milkshake, the chocolate cake, and the 2 giant tutti frutti chocolate nut bars. Sighing, Mrs. Harroway brushed some crumbs off the chaise lounge, and the Fetlock ran again. With a worried frown, she picked up the receiver and cautiously said, "Hello." Then her face lit up like the 4th of July fireworks. She chirped happily, "Oh, how sweet of you, Mrs. Workbasket. I'm simply delighted. Oh, of course. Yes, 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 of course. Lunch tomorrow. Oh, I'll be there. You can count on me." Hanging up the telephone, she rushed up to the window and called excitedly to Mrs. Wintergreen. "Oh, Caroline, it's happened. It's happened. Mrs. Workbasket has invited me to join the Earnest Workers. Isn't that wonderful? The first meeting is tomorrow at lunch. Oh, I do hope they will like me. Do you think they will? It would mean so much to Warner's business." And I'm going to stop there for today, friends, and I will be on later to read you some more.